You're listening to Symposium, a year-round conference in the arts, brought to you by Pipeline Artists. Welcome tonight to everybody. This is a one-on-one with LM Elliott, Laura Elliott. Fun fact, Elliott Road is where I grew up, so I already feel close to Laura.
There you go.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about all things historical fiction and research. And even if you aren't a writer of historical fiction and just a lover of history, but even if you're just writing anything that requires a lot of research, I'm sure you're going to get some nice little tips out of this conversation. Let's get started. Laura was a senior writer for the Washingtonian magazine, covering women's issues, mental health, and the performing arts for 20 years before becoming a New York Times bestselling author of historical and biographical fiction. Her 12th and latest, Louisa June and the Nazis in the Waves, set in Tidewater, Virginia, during the deadly U-boat attacks on our East Coast in 1942, has been called superb, deeply moving, and an engrossing must-have in four-starred reviews in Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, ALA Booklist, and School Library Journal. Her novels explore a variety of eras: the Italian Renaissance, the American Revolution, World War II, and the Cold War, and are written in a variety of ages. Many have been named NCSS, CBC Notables, Kirkus Bests, Bank Street College Best Books, and Jefferson Cup Honor Books. Her best-known works are Under a War-Torn Sky and Hamilton and Peggy. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited. So I really want to talk to you, first of all, about why historical fiction. And, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was a historical fiction podcast. I can't remember which one it was, but somebody had said in the podcast, and I thought this really spoke to historical fiction very well, when asked for her why, what was the function of fiction. She had said, fiction might be a way to return us to the facts and truth. And so in all of the work that you've done and the research you've done in the books that you've written, what is it about historical fiction that said to you, this is where I want to be?
Okay, I have a couple of answers for that. So
take your time.
I'll start with saying, you'll keep me on track. I'll start with saying that I sometimes call myself an accidental novelist. Because I was working at the Washingtonian magazine. I had been a journalist for a long time. And the way my first novel, Under a War-Torn Sky, came about because of a story that I wrote for the magazine, the dreaded holiday story. And I say dreaded because when you get that assignment, it's very hard to come up with something that's not cliched, about the holidays. And I loved my editor, who was old school, had been a wire reporter, and he would tend to look out the window and say, and Laura, when you write this story, make sure that, I don't know, maybe you should write about the meaning of the holidays and why we have religion. And, it just kept growing and growing. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. And I called all my sources from all my, having done a lot on women's issues and mental health issues, and I couldn't come up with anything that wasn't hackneyed and trite and hadn't been done before. And then I realized that the best story I'd ever heard my entire life was, and I didn't hear it very often because it was difficult for my father to share, but his homecoming from World War II, which was he'd been missing in action for months. His family thought he was dead, and he showed up in the family driveway unannounced 5 days before Christmas, 1944. Right? And you go, now I would always say, I have to say, and I kind of mean this, that World War II is so full of beautiful, heart-rendering anecdotes like that. If you can't write a good World War II story, you shouldn't be a writer, because all you have to do is just take in all these stories. They're so extraordinary. Yeah. So I received so many incredibly moving letters from people who read that article that I wrote for the December issue of the magazine, a truthful, factual, brief account of my dad's experiences, that I decided to highly fictionalize it and make the character into an everyman character of these pilots, these boys who had to bail out of burning planes onto Nazi-occupied territory. I exist, and my children, more importantly, exist because of some French teenagers who helped my dad. And that's the statistics with that are kind of staggering, which I can share with you later. But it is such an extraordinary story to share. So I took the sidestep to write these stories. And at that time, 20 years ago, when I wrote Under a War-Torn Sky, we didn't have all these really beautiful and moving, extraordinary stories about all these underground rat lines and women involved in the resistance that kind of came later. So it's as much a story about the Maquis and the French individuals who helped my dad as it was about this, or helped pilots as it was about this pilot's escape. And I did it because I had these incredibly inquisitive, and I did it for young adults because I realized that they might not be lucky enough to know World War II veterans firsthand. So I honestly planned after doing that to move back to the magazine and continue what I had been doing there. But that novel, again, because it's just about, it's not me, it's because it's World War II, was so successful that I stayed. And I loved doing it. Now, getting to your answers to why historical fiction, why history. One of the things that I learned, I think very much like a journalist in the way I write historical fiction, and the main things that I pulled from my journalistic background as I write is to look for holes in coverage, to take big issues and humanize them through individual stories of people going through the journeys and those challenges and the fears and the hopes and successes and failures of those big issues, and to look for the parable within facts. And the thing that's really interesting about historical fiction, because I've spent a lot for teens especially, is I've been blessed to spend a lot of time in schools now speaking for these various books. If you put a beating heart on history, right, it suddenly becomes palpable. You're suddenly worrying about who's around the corner. You're concerned about what's going to happen next for your protagonist. You have this emotional and visceral reaction to the story, right? And if it's good historical fiction and it's chock full of facts and, just everywhere in terms of plot events, but also the backdrop, they're learning by osmosis, and history becomes real to them because they're kind of experiencing it as you would any good novel, right? You become engrossed in the story and in the character arc. So I've really found that good historical fiction, if it's well researched and really factual in its underpinnings and its characters and plausibility, they can really learn a great deal. So those are the reasons for going. And here's a great example, and then I'll stop talking. It'll be your turn.
No, you're great. It's actually I'm like, okay, well, she answered that. She answered.
Oh, good. Well, here's a statistic, for instance, just from World War II, and I can talk about other things with the other books too.
Yeah.
But there's a statistic, World War II statistic, that of those thousands of boys who had to, and there were boys at that time, no women pilots or crew members, have to bail out of those planes, thousands and thousands of them, that 4,000 of them lived to come home, helped specifically by the French or Dutch Maquis. Sorry, I should turn off the phone.
I know, I was just thinking, is that mine?
No, it was mine, sorry. The French and Dutch Maquis, or, resistance workers. But the statistic is that for each American or British boy saved, one French worker died. So it was a 1-for-1 exchange. Now that's a dry statistic. Till you stand in the shoes, for instance, of that French person who made that choice to help that runaway lost boy who was probably, dazed and kind of scratched up and certainly lost and didn't speak French, because and it was an extraordinary act of kindness, because saving that one boy didn't win the war. It just saved that one boy. And it put you and everyone you loved and everyone you knew in the danger of being arrested by the Gestapo. So that's what historical fiction can do, right? It can take a dry number like that, and bring it to life in story.
I know oftentimes in movies, when people dramatize an historical event, they kind of take liberties And things that are happening in that film were not really the things that happened, but yet people watch them, especially younger people watch them, and they think that that's the truth.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but it drives me absolutely up the wall. Like it makes me crazy because it's like, that's not history. That's not what happened.
Yes.
Like, how do you feel about, the importance of what you're doing, and especially because you're addressing typically a younger audience, about being factual, and how, like, where is that line between history and fiction? And because you're also trying to entertain, and sometimes things that happen in everyday life are really boring, so you have to fictionalize them. So like when you made that decision to fictionalize the story about your dad, was that different because that wasn't something that anybody else would know? This was like a personal story, or like, where do you find that line?
I actually am a real stickler about fact because I have the same reaction you do. In good historical fiction, I often say too that I write biographical fiction if I'm writing about a real life character. Like I did have my little prop up here about Peggy Schuyler, or my novel about Ginevra da Benci, who was Leonardo's first portrait, and she was a poet. And, when you're dealing with history, especially with those, everything has to be based on fact. Okay. When I'm often asked is, well, what's made up and what's not? Well, I don't mean to be sassy when I say this, but I don't make up things. I take fact. That fact will then determine, please lie down. I have 2 dogs here. Sorry. Lie down. Those facts will tell me what my plot line is going to be. And then my characters, if they're fictional, they still, in my mind, need to be emblematic of types of people who would have lived through those experiences of history. So they become amalgamations of real life people that I've read about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If there's a real life person who walks through my pages, if he wasn't there at a certain time, I will not put him or her there. It's just the rule. This book that I just finished writing that's about the Depression in Virginia, I really, really, really wanted my character to be able to go hear FDR speak, but he was never, even though he spoke at many in a train stop, those wonderful back of the train minute speeches, and then he'd be off again. He went all through Virginia, but he didn't end up in Leesburg, so I didn't include it. I just wouldn't, for the very reason you're saying. It is a responsibility I have, particularly writing for teens, all the way, from, preteens through college age and to adults. But that if I'm going to be writing historical fiction, you're going to learn a lot, and then you're going to turn to the end, and I'm going to have an afterward explaining, more things to you, and where you can do more research. I feel like that's my responsibility. So yes, I'm with you. I, highly things that don't stick to facts and stick to plausibilities and reality make me crazy.
Yeah, because even like when I go to watch a movie, like I always wonder, like when I saw Dunkirk, which was so beautiful on the screen, I loved it. It's like, how much was real? How much was like, you're always questioning it because so many writers, and especially in film, they take a lot of liberties. So it makes you question. And so I like that you tell people where to go to learn more. Do you also tell them like, what you made up? Like, do you say, okay, so this person wasn't real?
Correct. Yes.
So like how long is your post book like in the back? Or do you do a whole little separate book?
It's like the length of a chapter. If I look at the one that I just did for Louisa June, for instance, I will explain, for instance, that all my main characters are fictional, but they are based, what happens in Louisa June is based on an actual sinking of a tugboat by a Nazi U-boat in March 31st, 1942, I'm sorry. So I explain who's fictional, who's fact, how they can learn more about it, and a quick synopsis of, like, for instance, I would write about, I have a couple characters in this who are part of the Merchant Marines, who actually had the highest casualty rate of any service in World War II, because they weren't protected. And the U-boat attacks were so deadly and so precise. So I talk a lot about who the Merchant Marines typically were. The characters who are in here are actually based on some people that I read about, and I explain all that. So that,
and also to everyone, look how gorgeous that cover is.
Isn't that a beautiful cover?
It's beautiful. And I love all the little Post-it notes.
Oh, yeah. This is so I can find the spots to talk to you about. I'm going to remove this dog. I'm so sorry. I'll be right there. Gracie, come here.
That's fine.
Gracie, come here. You're going to drive me nuts.
Okay, Panda's not causing the problem. It's Gracie.
No, Panda's always incredibly well behaved. Panda will stay. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I have two rescue dogs. So one's my son's, who's here because my son is hurt. And she's here briefly. And Gracie is a rescue dog who we're working on still.
And Panda, I believe, is already a Twitter star. So, so there's a couple questions that people have been asking. So I want to make sure I address those before we dive into the deeper discussion of research and how that is all done. And I can tell by all the Post-it notes you have in your book, you have a whole strategy.
Me too.
And I'm so excited to hear it. Anita asked, how do you feel about so many historical fiction writers on the banned book list?
Yeah, the banned book list is difficult and harsh and unfortunate and thing that we should all stand against. Actually, one of my books is about the McCarthyism and the Red Scare. And I open it with the fact that Robin Hood was banned. Robin Hood was banned because he took from the rich and gave to the poor. That's a communist philosophy, a socialist, red-leaning, subversive philosophy, it was deemed. And if a librarian didn't yank that book from the shelf, she could potentially lose her job or be called in front of a loyalty review board. That's how things were in the 1950s. And I see a lot of similarities coming today, sadly and tragically. And
it's been going on for hundreds of years. There's a book that I'm writing, and in the research of that, this gentleman was in the mid 1700s, and the essay that he wrote got on the list of forbidden books in Europe in 1700. So this is like not a new thing. It's been happening a long time. People, open your mind, listen to different viewpoints. It's okay.
One of the things that was interesting about doing that research on McCarthyism is that Eisenhower was very vehement about saying you should be able to read anything. And that we should, if you're worried about enemy philosophies infiltrating your household, well, you should probably read those enemy philosophies so you know what they are. There was also, if you look at the book Suspect Red, there was a man who, an FBI agent who actually went undercover to try to lure out communists. And he led 3 lives, he said. And he talked about how important it was for Americans to read absolutely everything, including Mein Kampf, or, including Lenin's writings too, that it's important to read everything.
Yeah, it is. Tammy has a question that I had on my list that I wanted to talk about, so we can just talk about it now. She said, I agree it is a responsibility to get the history right, deeply right. How do you find your fictional character's voice, slang, speed of speech, etc., has changes over time and is completely dependent on demographics? With that in mind, what kind of research do you do to find the voice of an era person?
Great question. And I actually have some visuals because I anticipated this. And I thought if I can, I'll talk about individual novels that I can really kind of hone in and be specific. That's helpful.
And we can talk about this in the context of research too. So, in the broader discussion of research, however you want to tackle the voice question.
Well, I can answer for the voice in many different ways, but a good example is with Peggy Schuyler, the Hamilton and Schuyler book. What I did to get that voice, because 18th century voice is different, right, is I always read, I read literature from that time. I get primary documents. Those are the treasures. That's the gem. That's where you get, the real word choice and rhythm and the way people would communicate with one another. The way that Peggy Schuyler, the way that book came about was my editor suggested I do something about Hamilton. And I wanted to do something that nobody else had done, whole and coverage. And I wanted to find kind of a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern look into the Hamilton, the amazing legend of Hamilton as it is today with the musical because of Lin-Manuel Miranda's brilliance. And there was Peggy with this, and Peggy, right? And only 36 solo words. So I thought, well, she's got to be interesting. There's nothing left in her writing. She dies young. I suspect the second wife burned all the letters or just didn't keep them, and we don't have them. But people wrote about Peggy a lot. She was called in all these different letters I had to read. This whole bookshelf here, floor to ceiling, is all the stuff that I read about Peggy. And I had to really dig and look, but she was called a wicked wit. She was endowed with a superior mind and rare accuracy of judgment in men and things. She was fluent in French. She taught herself German by reading her father's engineering manuals. She was a favorite at dinner parties and balls. And the thing that I really loved was in a letter from McHenry to Hamilton, McHenry is criticizing her as a Swift's Vanessa. Now, all you English majors out there, that's Jonathan Swift. It's a very obscure poem of his, but basically Swift Vanessa was a highly educated woman who was not likable because she wanted to discuss philosophy and politics with men. So how did I get her voice? All right, I've got the beginnings of it from all these little, things that people were saying about her. And then if you all are interested, you can go to a website that I can pull out in a minute for you of all of Hamilton's letters. And Hamilton's letters are these beautiful, overwrought, incredibly poetic, incredibly filled with braggadocio, so that it's like Hamilton is sitting down and whispering into your ear. He also drops all this gossip about Peggy, so I could find out where she was, who she had met, and I could actually build that whole novel around pretty much these touchstones that I got through Hamilton's letters. So reading all those letters, reading journals of that time, you get the voice, and you get the personas, and you get the societal constraints, and you get, for instance, with her, just how rare it was that she was such a proto-feminist intellectual. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
And, with others, it's mainly just doing a lot of reading at that time, or if it's later and you can listen to radio broadcasts so that you really get people's timbre and, vocabulary and the way of engaging with one another, it really helps.
Yeah. And I think that when we talked before about the line between history and fiction, I think the other thing that's helpful is to look at the things that people did, their actions, of when you find out what they did, so that when you talk about the character's voice, to then imagine, well, what kind of person would do that? What kind of personality would they have to take this action? If it was a very brave action, then obviously they're not going to be a really shy person, or maybe that one brave action was the thing that propelled them to change and to come out of their shell. I think so. It's not just about analyzing facts and things that happen. The fiction part comes in too, where you're kind of psychoanalyzing some of these people and figuring out what would they do, because obviously you didn't have dialogue of what Peggy said, you have to make things up. And it's, there is the fiction part of it when you're outside of the biographical books.
Yes, but what you can do when you're able to get a hold of these letters the way I was, just again sticking to Peggy, because all these letters have been collected, is when I pulled dialogue from those letters. I use those people's actual voices and their actual word choice. For instance, going back to McHenry and this criticism of her being a Swiss Vanessa, it actually gave me this wonderful moment for her to kind of, because he says, I can't remember the exact wording, but that he says to Hamilton, tell your sister-in-law that to be better liked, that she should care more about what women think than men think, or something. But anyway, I had it so that she turned it around on him in an encounter at a dinner party, because I did know he was there. I did know that he was one of the few people who attended Hamilton's wedding. So when you can, I will use those kinds of actual language.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do is when you find anecdotes about these people, that tells you a lot, what you're just talking about, the kind of analysis of, well, who were they, and how would they react given a certain circumstance, right?
Yeah.
Again, for Peggy, for instance, the only legendary anecdote that remains about her is that there was a home invasion by loyalists bent on kidnapping her father, who was actually very, very important. In the musical, you only hear that he lost his Senate seat and he was supposedly loaded, but he actually was a spy master. He was George Washington's right-hand man for spying. Anyway, so the loyalists really wanted to get him. They invade the house. Eliza is pregnant. Angelica is pregnant. There are all these little children around, and the very last little baby, Schuyler baby, is in a cradle. They all go running upstairs, including Peggy, including everybody, but they get up there and there's all this fighting going on downstairs. And it is Peggy who says, in essence, where's the baby? They left the baby downstairs, and she ran back down through all that fighting, grabbed the baby up and ran back upstairs. So that tells you right there, she's pretty bodacious.
Exactly. So let's get into research. And I'm sure that your history and experience as a journalist greatly informed how you tackle research. And I also had read something you had written about how, I know with journalism, you always try to find two sources. Well, oftentimes when you're searching for something back in history, it's hard to find one source, let alone two. So can we talk about when you first come up with an idea and you decide, okay, I'm gonna write about this world, and so there's going to be some fiction within it, some fictional characters, some composite characters or whatnot, and how you go about tackling all of that and organizing it. Like you said, you pointed to your bookshelf behind you, and I don't remember what year you wrote that book, but you still have all that stuff right behind you. So you clearly or, love the history and the research that you did. I mean, that's a huge part of writing, especially in this genre. So can you speak to maybe how you first start tackling it, and maybe some of your whole process of research and organizing it and making it so you can grab this little fact, that little fact as you're writing, because no one can possibly remember everything that's in that bookshelf.
I expected you're asking me this question. So
she's also a psychic. So
no. I do talk in schools a lot. So but I knew that you were interested in this. So just sticking to Peggy, since we were just talking about that, because it was such a kind of an enormous undertaking. I also should tell you all that I got that assignment, researched it, and wrote 90,000 words in 10 months. It was insane. And I will say that my two adult creative artist children were huge helps to me. Peter read everything about George Washington he could get his hands on and fed me information about him, which was incredibly helpful. So I'm old school. I know most of y'all probably use computers and other things. I do that to a certain extent, but I find that if dealing with my computer, I can't find things. So I have these bookshelves. So like with Peggy, this looks so compulsive, but I didn't want to pick you up and move you to my mess over here. I color code all my files.
Folders.
In folders. So I take notes from the sticky notes that I have. I make certain notations. The first thing I'm going to do in dealing with historical fiction is I try to know what my beginning is and what my ending is, so that I know what I'm writing to. And then the stepping stones for me are going to be the historical events the factual historical events that my either real life characters or my made up characters are going to encounter and be involved in and challenged by. So for instance, there is somewhere in here, there would have been a series. Yeah. all the things. I knew that for my characters are going to be in Morristown for a certain amount of time. So I would be writing down events and people who were in Morristown. They're in yellow there. Okay. Yeah. And a lot of it is following breadcrumbs. Like the reason I'll keep files is I'll find one thing and then I need to find out more. Right. Mm-hmm. So rather than having it spewed all over the place, I will stick it in that same file. Does that make sense? So that I can then find it, because that's how many files I had for Peggy. Wow. And I think so I could say purple was Philip Schuyler, his staff and visitors. The plain were Hamilton's letters. The dark yellow was Hamilton in every place he was. Green was Peggy and yellow was Albany in the mansion. And also spewed through all that will be general reading about what did they wear? What did they eat? How did they brush their teeth? Mm-hmm. What was the weather like?
And there are books that you can get that talk about certain periods. So, like for research, so, like, the clothes that they wore, the food that they eat at that time. I mean, if I were at my house, I'm at our antique shop because I thought an historical place with all these hundreds of year old things would be a great place to have this conversation. But I have one of these books that tells you all that kind of stuff. Another thing that I've done, because for those people who are computer people, is I took a big spreadsheet and there were certain things that were factual. And so the dates and things that happened as I would come upon them, I would put them in the spreadsheet in chronological order, but then I would have like a column for the facts of what happened, but then a column for each character. So I could say, like, how did that impact that character? How did it impact that character? And so you can see like events that would naturally, organically create good subplots or supporting characters. And then if there's like a character that at the end of all this research you look at and there's like really nothing going on in his column, it's like, well, I don't think I really need him, So there's lots, like, that's like for those people who like to do on their computer. I'm kind of a 1 foot in both. Like I like to hold the physical book. I like to write in. I stick the sticky notes. I think your color coding of files is genius. I can tell you right now, my coworker, Erica Davis, probably, I can't believe we didn't hear her scream with excitement. She loves color coding.
So good. I've heard her say that.
Yes. And it just
helps me visually when I pull out a big, huge, file like that I'm not thinking, where is that? Oh, I can see it, I know that I'm looking in Morristown, again, to use that, or Albany, it's all the same. So I don't get lost.
Right. I think that's great. So do you ever, what do you do with all those files when you're done with the book?
They're there.
How many filing cabinets do you have?
There's that one big one there. There's one here. There's things in boxes. There are ones downstairs. And I need to start shedding them. But, I found that there have been certain, like I've written 4 World War II books now.
Yeah.
3 of them are interrelated. They're all, I wrote Under War-Torn Sky, and that one is on I think it's its 18th reprinting. I've been incredibly lucky with it. And when I would go to schools, these 8th and 9th grade boys it was the most wonderful experience. They would lean forward and whisper, "Do Patsy and Henry get married?" They wanted to know if the hometown girl was going to be true to Henry in the end. So I ended up writing a sequel that is in post-liberation France, which was quite an extraordinary experience to research because it's not what I expected to find at all. And then I ended up writing like a home front companion book. I needed the files from that first book and the third book to write the third one. The third
you would have been so mad at yourself if you threw those out.
I would have, because it's amazing. It was the link. And if we want to get into the weeds of talking about where you find these things, I love footnotes, you guys. That's where you find this little tiny kernel of stuff that often makes the entire difference in everything. I actually made some notes to myself in those teasers to talk about the spy, the kidnaps, the Maquis, Texas Willie, the Armageria, the tugboat, and the marble. All things that I found by accident as I was researching that completely kind of changed different books' trajectory.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, the things that you find by accident. I too will look at the footnotes because they'll have like a sentence or something that's just like as if it's just like, oh, whatever, like a throwaway sentence. But then there's a footnote on it and you then go and look because it's still the whoever wrote that book, the biography or whatever, that was their interpretation and their, like, this was the thing they thought was important. But that might have been important to what they were writing. But if you go look at the source material for where they got that line, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that maybe didn't pertain to what we're doing, but pertains to you. Correct. There was research I was doing for this book. Everybody thought this guy was just like antisocial and sort of socially backwards and whatnot. And as I'm diving in and I just like tripped upon this, it was nothing like that. He was depressed because his wife cheated on him and got syphilis. And then all their other children after that died at, either were stillborn or died, So of course he wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm Mr. Social and fun at a party. It's like, if you dig, that's where you find that stuff. But then once you know that, well, now you know that this woman who was the love of his life, like, cheated on him, that makes a whole difference in your story. Now you have a whole other layer of conflict to add to it. Yeah. So, following those breadcrumbs, like you say, is so critical in historical fiction. Because so many times what happens in real life is crazier than fiction.
Yes. And there's a wonderful quote from Mark Twain, who used to write both, he wrote fiction and journalistic newspaper articles as well. And he said, as many have, fact is stranger than fiction. And they're basically the same to write, but that fiction is harder because fiction has to make sense. As we know, real life often does not. And you can simply say, I'm just reporting the facts, ma'am. Yeah.
Do you ever, just stepping back into journalism for a second, do you ever miss it? Do you ever crave going back and just being a little reporter again? Or
I do sometimes. I do. And it's interesting. I'm a little, I wouldn't say schizophrenic in the types of books I do, but I have done a lot of different style books and written for different ages. And I have two kind of political oriented docudramas, docu novels, people have called them, about the Berlin Wall and about the McCarthyism one that I mentioned before. So I do miss sometimes being able to hear of, current events that I would really like to kind of dig into a little bit. You can't do that as much in novels. However, I will tell you, with Walls, for instance, which is this one, that whole idea came to me at Thinking Like a Reporter. I think I was out actually talking about Peggy, going around and talking about it. And so I was sitting in coffee shops a lot and listening to the news. And the former president was in Helsinki befriending Putin and denigrating NATO and our intelligence agencies. And I just started wondering, do people really remember why NATO was formed, which of course was Russian aggression and that brutal takeover of Eastern Europe after World War II, which culminates in the Berlin Wall going up, which actually went up overnight. So I knew that, for instance, was, okay, there's kind of a broad issue. I wanted to be able to write about that because I was canvassing kids, and I had asked them, do you know what NATO is? I get this kind of, and this was at, all types of schools and all types of kids, with all types of, privileges and good luck. And very few knew anything about NATO. And it's just because our social studies teachers run out of time, what they're trying to teach in a school year. And so then I'd ask them, well, do you know about the Berlin Wall? And mostly I got, it came down, didn't it? And that was it. And honestly, what could be a more heart-rending, moving, dramatic show rather than tell story about Cold War and Russia's antipathy toward Western democracies than the Berlin Wall? So I get my journalistic fix, by doing books like that.
Yeah. So when you come up with these ideas and you think like, this is the world in which, so let's talk about like the characters, like how you really get into the characters and, when you write dialogue, writing that period dialogue, do you focus a lot about making sure that's accurate, even though that might be a stumble block for people to read in today's time, the dialogue written that way. Because if you're reading something, sometimes, they said things in a way back then that isn't natural to how we speak now. So have you ever thought about, I'm sure you have, what are your thoughts on writing dialogue that's period accurate, or writing it so that it's more consumable for today's audience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It depends on the time period. The one about Ginevra da Vinci and Leonardo in 15th century Florence, for instance, the language then was quite different, very poetic, beautiful, would be difficult and in our modern mind, slow. But I had to be careful to not have a modern clip to it, so I kind of find a middle ground between what I was reading and making sure that I incorporated some of that vocabulary and some of that kind of, pacing, but not do it too much, because it would, modern readers would not be able to get through it. Now, with something like the Berlin Wall, it was so much fun to pull in slang from the 1960s, and to talk. I loved, it used to be, I'm LM Elliott because when I first started writing, they didn't want boys to know I was a girl. Now, with the internet, everybody knows, and but it was different back then. There was this perception that that teenage boys wouldn't want to read a war book written by a woman because the assumption would be that she wouldn't get it. And I'm proud to say, and it's great fun for me, and actually have this tremendous editor, Mr. PM Elliott, who helps me make sure that I get the male voice. And I hope it's okay for me to say that there oftentimes I hear his voice, his teammates, his friends in the characters that I'm creating. There's a scene in Suspect Red that sort of was very inspired by something that had happened to him. Same thing with my daughter, and her friends, her pony club friends, you absorb. The thing I always say to writers, and young writers in particular, is that you should always be saving string. It's an old journalistic term. You should always be listening and absorbing and thinking, ooh, that's an interesting characteristic. I'm going to write that down. Ooh, I like the way he said that. I'll write that down. Beware being friends with a writer, right? Mm-hmm. But I also say you should be an Aeolian harp, which was in the Greek times, they would put a little Cupid lyre out into the winds. And the Greeks very much believed that we resonated with the universe, that we were very much part of the elements. And that Aeolian harp, each string would catch the wind. It wouldn't move and it wouldn't sound until the wind came through it. And it would reverberate with its own tone and then harmonize with the one that was next to it, right? A writer should always be absorbing and listening, right? So even when you're writing a period piece, you get the characteristics of people and, especially coming of age stories. These are perennial challenges and perennial themes, right? They're going to be the same. All you have to do, though, is make sure that it's period accurate, the vocabulary, in such a way that is accessible. But I got to tell you, writing those boys in, because it's two boy protagonists, in Walls, one who is an army dependent, army brat, stationed in Berlin the year that the wall goes up, who has a cousin, second cousin, in East Berlin. And the story is about how and if those two boys can come to trust one another with all the disinformation and all the propaganda the East Berliner is being given. And one of the most fun scenes I had to write, and it had a lot to do with language, was the spitball fight on the duty train among a bunch of army kids, which is a lot of fun. And the way I got that was listening to movies, and I interviewed some people. I found them on the internet. This is the thing, you all, the internet is your friend, as well as all these beautiful primary documents. You can find so much now in digitized collections, but also people and experts that you can interview. And that novel, if it has worth, it's largely because I just stumbled on this alumni group of Berlin brats, that's what they call themselves, who had been there in the 60s, gentlemen in their, I guess in their early 70s now, who told such wonderful stories. And boy, did I just pull those in and use them. in the
Yeah.
novel. So research can be all sorts of different things, you know?
Yeah. And there's a lot of, even like Facebook groups, there's a lot of people who are, experts at certain things. And so when you talk about,
before we forget that, y'all, if you want to do period pieces where there are reenactors, go and talk to them, because they know everything. They know about daily life. They know, and they love talking about it. Sorry.
And that's what I want to get to, like kind of like the list of all the different kinds of things that you've done, like primary sources, where do you find them? Like, and when you talked about radio shows and all that kind of stuff, like, so maybe just like holler out like the whole list of things that you typically go to. But also I want to touch on, somebody was saying in the Q&A, what do you do when you can't find those primary documents, or it's so far that they said they're interested in the 3rd century BC in Republic of Rome. I mean, like when you're trying to find what happened in the world then, any thoughts on that? I know I threw a lot at you right there, but
I'm just going to stick on the 3rd century thing because that's a really good question. That's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Find a librarian, find an expert, a professor in that time period who can begin the conversation for you and begin your quest for information. It's not that far back, but I'll give you, for instance, on my spy thing here, I was so excited to identify, with the help of the Mount Vernon librarians, a spy that had never been fully acknowledged, a double agent who was working for Philip Schuyler, who, you guys, actually may have saved us from the invasion of the Brits from Canada, because he carried some peach brandy in his back pocket. He had the gift of gab, and he recognized that those guys didn't look right. And he chatted them up and found out that they were couriers. Anyway, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But it was this, I couldn't get the information. It's not 3rd century BC because that's quite a challenge, but find an expert, find somebody who will tell you everything, and they'll be so joyous to be asked. But I was able to corroborate and truly identify this guy because of this librarian who got so excited about my question that he started looking at into his digitized files that they would only have at the Mount Vernon Library of pension applications by American Revolutionary War veterans. And we found him through that. And then because of that, another librarian tracked down a memoir that his grandchildren wrote, repeating all of his stories, including the time that he saved himself from being hanged by the British by giving the Masonic sign of distress. And that was all from librarians. So librarians are your friends. They know everything, or they can get their hands on it for you. And be sure to thank them profusely, because they live highly unacknowledged lives, but they are the keepers of the realm. They are the keepers of, of knowledge. And, they are upper beings. Yes. Whoever Erica. Yes, they are. And I have really found, and I think, and that may be too my journalistic background too. I'm not afraid of interviewing people. Don't be afraid of talking to people, you all, especially those who have spent their lives digging into research and collecting these little tidbits of lives. They will love sharing it with you. They truly will. You just have to say thank you a lot and send them a thank you note afterward, so.
Yeah, people really, especially historians who there's not going to be a lot of people asking about, some of these topics. So they're going to be really excited to talk about it.
Yes, actually. And I can't come up, I'm sorry, with doing the Ginevra book, which, is 15th century. There's a lot written about Da Vinci, of course, and everybody who was in Florence at that time. But Ginevra, interestingly, had been misinterpreted. That's another story altogether, but her portrait had been misinterpreted. It was a kick-ass feminist researcher who realized that her portrait was actually commissioned by a man, the ambassador Bernardo Bembo from Venice, who took her as his platonic muse. But the thing that made me really want to write about her, and this is about a librarian, is there's only one line remaining of her poetry. She was exquisitely educated. Oh, there's so many things I want to tell you about her. But anyway, there was one line of her poetry, which is, I beg your pardon, I am a mountain tiger. Only line that was left. And the reason we have it is because a librarian found a letter from a court musician who had left Florence and gone to Rome. And he was literally writing back. She figured out it was a letter that went back to Ginevra de' Benci, where this court musician says, I'm trying to prove to the ladies of Rome that the ladies of Florence are far superior. And I need as proof that poem of yours. You know that poem where you said, I beg your pardon, I'm a mountain tiger? Can you send that to me, in essence? And so God bless that librarian who found that, made the connections, and put it into the record.
I think that's going to be my new Twitter bio.
Well, it's wonderful. We'll be English majors here for a minute, but the sonnet, it's a dichotomy, right? Mountain tiger would say, I beg your pardon. Now, here's how obsessive I get. I sent my daughter on this quest for me because I was researching 1,000 other things at the time, and I don't know where Peter was. I didn't ask him to do it, but I wanted to check, how would she know about mountain tigers? Well, there were tigers in the hills of Italy at that point still, a certain type, Siberian tigers.
Wow. Who would have thought?
Yeah. And it's not like I needed that information, but I needed to know and make sure it's accurate. So anyway.
So let's go back to the list of things that you do, to you finding your research. Like you had mentioned radio shows and stuff like that, because I'm sure there's another question in here about, really find, how do you find things in the distant past that are scarce, but let's focus on what you have been able to find.
Distant past is really hard. I'm not really that helpful.
One thing I would say about the distant past, if you have a history teacher, colleges in your town, go look at some of the courses that the colleges offer.
Yes.
And if there's something in that era, go speak to the professor. And I'm sure they'd be happy to have a conversation, but also to then tell you where you could continue on your research.
Yes, and that's what they live for too, y'all. I mean, They are educators. They wish to share. I was just going to say museum curators, whoever just said that. Yeah. Because again, museum curators, particularly in more ancient times, are going to have a lot of information. For instance, there's, where was I doing that research and why was I doing that? It's because I thought about doing something in ancient Rome and then I got sidetracked by something else. For instance, art in that time period used to be very careful presentations of daily life. Often, the pots and everything. If you look at them, a museum curator would really be extraordinarily helpful. And again, they're going to want to be helpful. The other thing too is that PBS has amazing websites that might have something that could be useful. The ADA sometimes, and again, university websites will often have collections of things on a specific topic that could be helpful.
Yeah. And if you've got, some people still have access to even if you're out of college, to your college libraries, sometimes you can still gain access to those even as a postgraduate.
Yes. And JSTOR, that's another really wonderful. In fact, what we should do? We should put in the recording, when we send everyone the recording, maybe we can make a little list for them of great websites to go to. Would that be helpful? I'm sure it would be.
Yeah, I want the list.
Yeah, it depends on the,
of course, the period that they're looking for. But, before we go on to that, there's somebody said, I'm really interested in your success, because we were talking about the period. They said, I'm really interested in your success with World War II stories. I submitted a manuscript to an agent and was told World War II stories don't sell well, or rather World War II stories about the Holocaust and persecution. You don't think there is a bias against that kind of book? I think they are important, but getting publishers on board seems hard.
Here's the unfortunate truth. It's not that publishers aren't interested in those topics, because they are. It's because there has been such a big wave of really magnificent books, unfortunately. And things go in waves. They do. My main editor at HarperCollins, for instance, Catherine Teagan, published the Divergent series. And there was that big peak of Hunger Games and the Divergent series, and then a whole lot of dystopia. Nobody wants dystopia right now. No, I shouldn't say nobody, but there's less drive, because it feels like, oh, we did that. Yeah. It'll come back. So whoever it is that has that manuscript, hang on to it for like 3 or 4 years, and then try again. I have actually a spin-off novel that I would really, really want to do about one of the characters that I put into Under War-Torn Sky, just a brief encounter with her, who had was extraordinarily important to the Comet line, and she's credited with saving the lives of 150 aircrew members. It's a phenomenal story. And they've told me to hold on it, just hold off on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Timing.
World War II, it's timing. I'm sorry. World War II there will always be interest in it. It will always sell. But right now it's because of how much has come out recently.
And even now, when you watch the news and you watch what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, I just keep thinking about all those personal stories and the incredible stories that are going to come out of that. I mean, it's not in our history yet, but it will be. And that brings, and perhaps to this person with a World War II story, perhaps this moment now where people in present time are seeing war for the first time in our lives in that kind of way, something that could become a third world war. Perhaps that will bring a resurgence of World War II stories, because people are now looking backwards to understand what's happening today.
Yes, actually, I was just today writing an op-ed piece about that very thing, about, the tragedy of history repeating itself if we don't heed its lessons, right?
Right.
And I actually use the example you were just talking about, because sometimes my old journalism colleagues say to me, why aren't you writing about current events anymore? And when are you going to write a real novel? Which, yeah. And I bite my tongue from saying, and how many have you written? But it's because it's that concept that history isn't so relevant, and that YA literature is lesser somehow. I beg to differ, but the thing that I said to corroborate what you just did was that history is not dry statistics. It is the stories of, for instance, Ukrainian grandmothers taking up those, machine guns, not leaving their home, or those Ukrainian nurses who had the courage to not leave that hospital nursery, even though explosions are going on all around them, because there might be some parents trying to come back to get those children, and those women were not going to leave. That's history.
Right. And also, I think part of what's great about historical fiction is when you can find those stories from the past that still, that say something, that say a little something about what's happening today. And sometimes, it's just that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And, these people from hundreds of years ago aren't that different from us. And
say emotional things aren't that different. And the revelations and self-definition and quest to find who we are and the courage we want to have, those are age-old desires, right? That will change and be, the thing I say about historical fiction too is that there are universal truths and universal questions that are that do have reactions and challenges that are specific to the time. Makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Did you want a break or are you okay?
I'm okay, but we can take a break if people want a break.
No, I'm okay. They're at home. They can take a break.
They can come and go. Go and have dinner.
They can come and go. They can take us with them. They can. If someone would go to the refrigerator and get me a glass of wine, that'd be awesome. Still on, somebody mentions World War II again. So I get that World War II should be as close to historical fact as possible. I agree the research, this question came in earlier on in our conversation. I guess that I agree the research is worth highlighting too, but I have a novel under development dealing with a 12th century known figure about which little information is known in his personal life. I've taken some liberties. I think just talking about this person is doing a service. So what's my question? How much elaboration is considered acceptable for distant past where historical details are scarce?
Well, in some ways, you're gifted this wonderful palette that not so much is known about that specific person. To be responsible, I would just suggest that you read a lot, as much as you can, which I'm sure you already have, about that time period and other people who might be like your person. There might be information about similar personas that you could then, use as kind of an amalgamation, right? Use a little bit of this person, a little bit of that person, and put them into your person, and then acknowledge it and afterward. So. But as long as it's representative, when I do that, like going back to World War II, the Under War-Torn Sky story, when my character, Henry Forrester, has to walk across France 800 miles to the Spanish border, he meets certain Maquis. That's what they call themselves, not the resistance. The Maquis is this wonderful French word, and Corsican word, actually, that meant shady undergrowth. So they called themselves the Maquis d'Henri, or the Maquis de Jacques, or anyway, these individual leaders. I tried to make each of the people that he met emblematic of like the women, the educated aristocrats who would help. My Madame Galois is very, or she actually is kind of inspired by two specific people. Oh, I can tell you about them if you want. Lucy Albrecht and a woman who went by the code, her code name was Marie Claire for her two cats, Marie and Claire. And then there's a young mother out in a rural area. She was very iconic in terms of the young farmer who would try to, take in people and help the Maquis and hide guns in the wheat barrel kind of thing. So each of them weren't a specific person, but they were very representative of that type of person that I read about. Old men, aristocratic, upper middle class women who had the education, often spoke German and French and English and could play act very, very well. Rural, these stoic, unbelievably brave rural families, children who often were the guides of these airmen. So I'm sorry, I forget what it. So I would read a lot of different things and then make it into one character, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It might be
finding out what's happening all around them in the world helps you figure out, and also paying attention to what you do know about them, like their actions, again, like what we said before, just that can say a lot about what their personality might be like.
Yes, exactly. Well, just take, and I'll talk about Marie Claire, Madame Galois, and if Peter's there, she's his favorite character. He's written an unbelievably beautiful, much better than the book screenplay of Under War-Torn Sky. Anyway, he loved Madame Galois. Her reactions were very much based on these extraordinarily brave two women who were just steely in their resolve and both their philosophical belief in the freedom of mankind and their willingness to take on and often cow the regular German soldiers by being very austere. And it is, I see his note. Right. like, for instance, just a real quick story about Lucy Albrecht, for instance. She's one of the women that I read about. And there's an amazing memoir of hers, if you want to read it. It's called Outwitting the Gestapo. She was 8 months pregnant with her second child when her husband, Raymond, was arrested by the Gestapo and heading to be interrogated by Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon. And this is the great thing about historical fiction too, is it allows readers and me as an author too to think, what would I do in that circumstance? She was 8 months pregnant, and I'm thinking, and had a little child. And I'm thinking, I might take my little child and my 8-month pregnant self and leave, knowing that Raymond, it's highly unlikely that Raymond is going to survive. What she does, however, is that she marches herself to the Gestapo office. And she says, I understand that you have Raymond Albrecht under arrest. And they say, yes, he's about to be interrogated. And who are you exactly? She says, doesn't matter who I am. What are you going to do with him exactly? And they say, well, we're going to interrogate him and probably execute him on the church steps as an example. She said, well, that's fine. But before you do that, he has to marry me. Look at me. So she's pretending that this is truth. You can't make up this kind of thing.
You can't.
She's pretending that she's a wronged, unwed mother, that he has to marry her. And they say, okay, fine. That's great. We'll get you married in the church and then we'll shoot him right there. And she says, no, I can't.
Maybe that's where Quentin Tarantino got the idea for Kill Bill.
Maybe.
Like wedding scene.
Yeah, all you have to do is read this stuff. That's what I'm saying. If you can't write a good World War II story, I'm sorry, you need another job. So she said, but I can't get married like this. I need to put on my better dress. They believe her. She organizes an ambush. She gets Raymond. She saves him. He lives to be 80 years old in the United States.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
So as soon as
you can't make this up.
No. Now, I didn't use that story, but boy, do I know that woman's personality, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, somebody here is going to use that story. Write that down, people.
Yeah, do. Well, you look at her book. It's called Outwitting the Gestapo.
Yeah. Okay. So, here's a really good question, because there's so much, you don't want to have to explain so much about history and make it like a history lesson. So do you assume
be careful of that, not to do info dump? Yes, please.
Yes. Do you assume your reader has a certain amount of knowledge of history that you don't have to explain, or other tips that you might have about getting information out and the exposition out in a way that's still an entertaining read and doesn't feel like you're reading your, fifth grade textbook?
Yes, it's hard. And what you have to do, the phrase I've coined is judicious dribbling throughout the entire. No, I don't assume that they know history. Again, part of it's because I'm writing for, high schoolers, college age, and adults too. I'm finding that a lot of adults don't know a lot about history, frankly. So no, you try not to assume. But yes, you have to be very, very wary of saying, and this is what you need to know about this time period. Mm-hmm. I try to slip in little details in the descriptions of like what they're reading or what news event might have just happened. Or, for instance, in Louisa June, speaking of radio broadcasts, I had the mother and Louisa listening to one of Eleanor Roosevelt's Sunday broadcasts, explaining about how life has to be reoriented, basically. And ladies, and you want to keep your spirits up at all times because people expect you to, to be the guiding light of positive thinking kind of thing. She's saying not that way, but so that allowed me to show the mother being still kind of a student and a little bit starstruck about Eleanor Roosevelt, but also allowed me to let Eleanor Roosevelt speak to you about what's going on during that time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question. I mean, there are many more. In Walls, for instance, the opening scene is with this young Army kid having just moved in. Our military kids, I was so glad to be able to feature military kids in that book, because they say as many as 6 to 9 times a child would move between kindergarten and 12th grade. That is a lot of upheaval in their lives. So I don't say that to you. What I do is I start with Drew and his sisters having to walk into a welcome to the post party and showing all the anxiety that he has. I also, I just show it in the way he reacts and what people say to him, and how, the other kid kind of comes and postures to find out, who's going to be top dog in the conversation. But it also allows me, what I did was I had them come in when the Olympics were happening, which was factual in that particular month. And an American who had actually been on that post wins a boxing match and is jeered, and there's kind of a protest by the Italians and East Germans who were there, which allowed me to talk about the political upheaval and the tensions of the Cold War just by what was going on in that event. So, I mean,
that's where a lot of your skills just as a writer come in, as opposed to, this isn't, you aren't an historian.
Yes.
In how you're telling stuff, you're taking that history and turning it into something entertaining, especially when you're doing those YA books. I mean, how else are the kids going to keep turning the page? If it feels like they're reading their history book, they're just chucking it.
Yes. Yes. I say, especially for teenage boy readers, you have to have bugs, battles, and beatable bullies. Yeah. Yes, that's very, very important. I'm sorry, there was something else I was just going to say that you made me think of. I know what I was going to say. There's a difference between research and then there's a difference between writing, right? And there is, and that it is hard to not be kind of when you love history as much as we obviously do, and anybody who's listening tonight, there is a tendency to go, oh, look at this fact, look at this fact. I only use about 40% of what I learn, which kills me, that I can't use all of it, but it does turn into too much of a history lesson at that point. What you want to do is take your reader as much as you can. And when I say this judicious dribbling, it's like I am going to make sure that I describe, I just stick to the walls, that one chapter, that they're going to be Rice Krispie treats, lasagna, onion dip with Fritos, and we're listening to Frank Sinatra. So you've got the whole kind of like, we're in 1960 here, and I use certain slang that's going to tell you, and I describe the clothes that people are wearing, just, in a throw off phrase, so that if I've done my job, I've taken you and just plopped you into that world, right? And all that history and everything should be kind of contained in the conversation and what they're talking about. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I have to I know who said this question, and it says anonymous attendee, and I know who it is. Do you snack or drink while you write? Hello, Erica Davis.
I don't snack. I'm sorry. No, but I drink coffee constantly. And Peter's laughing wherever he is about, yes, you open the microwave and there's an abandoned coffee. Well, I've got another one here. That's what I do.
Yeah. Well, we're all about the snacks. Are there off-limit topics, like stuff you'll never write about? Things in history that maybe you're just like, I don't want to touch that?
Boy, that's a good question. Not that I could name right now. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't come up on something that I would think, just when I was at the magazine and I was writing, and you all probably piece together that I'm old now because I did 20 years as a journalist and I did 20 years as an author now. But back in the late 80s and early 90s, when I was at the magazine, I was writing about things that were rough. I wrote about sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, pre O.J. Simpson, and those were in a this extraordinary story of a woman who was assaulted, raped, handcuffed, thrown off a bridge into a river, and managed to live, and was just a phenomenal woman. Those were all difficult stories to write, and to really, for those kinds of stories, I tell you what made me able to be a novelist, I think, is I did what we used to call new journalism, which now is called creative nonfiction, which was that I would follow subjects, if I could, for a month or more at a time, and write narratives, long narratives, 8 to 10,000 word pieces that were written primarily in scenes. And, dialogue is the best character reveal, honestly, you all, if you can remember that. The way they say things, the words that they use, the staccato or the poetical, it tells you a lot about the character. And I learned about that by listening and writing down what people said word for word as best I could, and having a tape recorder going at the same time. And so I sat and held the hand of a lady while she was having a bone marrow transplant for breast cancer, and I was so privileged to be part of their lives. But it was a deep dive in. The World War II, the sequel that I did to Under War-Torn Sky, really is more, several of my books have been in that category of new adult, which sadly doesn't really exist anymore, but I think is so wonderful because it's really for 20s to adults, and A Troubled Peace really falls into that category because post-war France was almost as chaotic and violent in some ways as the war, which I had not anticipated. And I had to do a lot of reading about Ravensbrück and what happened, during interrogations to women by the Gestapo. So it was tough. So it's not like I shy away from, the human species. We are phenomenal and remarkable and so inspiring because we have words, you all, for one thing. We can write poetry, we can write songs, we can imagine these things. And yet we are also capable, as we are witnessing today in Ukraine, of just the most grotesque kind of brutalities. So one of the reasons I love writing for YA is that I really avoid being nihilistic in when I'm writing. I can write about these horrors and yet find the one person who's holding that light in that darkness and feature that person. Mm-hmm. Teens, you better give them truth, and you better not give them pablum, or they are going to throw your book out the window and curse your name. But they want it encased with the belief that if we try hard enough and you stand your ground and you can find enough people of like mind, we can push that rock just, a little bit. Yeah. Boy, what was the question that got me into that? I'm sorry.
If there was anything kind of off limits for you that you wouldn't write.
No, but I will tell you, there are things that I would feel like I'm not the right person to write about. Mm-hmm. There's a real answer. There are certain things, certain experiences that even as much as I would research them and try to get that voice and feel like I probably would do a good passable enough depiction, there are certain things that they're better writers to write those topics.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Because there's so much. I mean, you would clearly write anything that's moving and moves you and compels you, and that you feel passionate enough to write. But there's some topics that, I'm all about. Are you the right person to write it?
Right. Now, I would also say, though, there's just certain types, and the phrase that we're all using these days is cultural appropriation. We just shouldn't. Some of us just shouldn't go to certain topics. It's just not, But I would also say, don't be afraid to delve in and imagine standing in other people's shoes. because that's what we're supposed to be doing as writers. Like I say this to teenagers all the time. I want to hear your journal. I want to hear all your internal thoughts. I do. I know they're beautiful. They're poetic, but you're a real writer when you can tell me what Jeannie's feeling right now, sitting in that chair and looking, beautiful in her antique store. What is she thinking? Tell me what, from how she's sitting, how she's speaking, if she's smiling, what, is she sitting back in her chair? What is she thinking? So, there would be a lot of people who would say, you can't write boys. You know what? I can write boys. I just have to learn to think like them and to listen to them. And then I give it to Peter to read and make sure it's okay.
Yeah. And I think, having somebody to check your work, somebody,
oh, yes.
To do that and kind of let you know, am I on the right path?
Yes.
I mean, we were all teenagers at one point in our lives. It's not like we forgot what it's like to be a teenager, right. But still teenagers today, they're a little different. So it's always good to.
Yes. And I would also tell you that in my mind, good YA fiction, especially historical fiction, is going to have lots of ages in characters, not just teenagers. Some of my favorite characters to write, like with Louisa June, there's a woman named Cousin Belle in there who is this elderly, bodacious, unbelievably strong-willed woman who has lived quite a life and is followed by cats and speaks in great pearls of wisdom. And I loved writing her. So,
we're talking about research and inspiration for stories. What is another great resource is going to assisted living homes, like yes. And volunteering at a local nursing home or something like that. There's a lot of elderly people who still have their wits about them, who are starving for conversation, and they have incredibly untold lives. And also it's just a nice thing to do. So you kind of hit two things.
They would love it. And they're often, wondrous storytellers, right? Because they would have been brought up. I was really lucky to grow up knowing a lot of, the greatest generation people. And these are people who survived the Depression, and then in a very no-nonsense commitment to community and the sanctity of humanity, went off and fought World War II. And then maybe they got involved in space flight, or maybe they got involved in the civil rights movement. They've seen this, so many kind of tectonic shifts in our society and the way we think. They're tremendous people to talk to and get story ideas from.
And even people in your own family. Like I sat down years ago with my dad and recorded like 3 hours of him just talking about his childhood and his time in service and all that. And my sister did the same thing with my mother. And my mother's 90 now. It's wonderful. You've got a lot of resources right in your own world that you might not even have ever tapped into. And even just having conversations with them spark ideas that maybe you're not going to write something about them, but like it sparks an idea of, I'm going to go down that path and go research that era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially as you can listen to oral histories too. There are a lot of really, like World War II. There's a big collection of oral histories now that are quite wonderful.
Yeah. Somebody asked a while back, and I want to make sure I hit this question, that they've noticed a lot of your stuff is written in first person POV, and between the states was third person. How do you decide which to use?
It's about half, I think, in first person and in third person limited. That's a good question.
You tend to write a lot of your YA in first person?
No, but I do when it feels right to me. Like Louisa June is in first person. Under War Torn Sky, across, Trouble Piece Across, that's not. Walls is not. Suspect Red is not. Give Me Liberty is not. Hamilton and Peggy is not. Da Vinci's Tiger is. And part of, for instance, with Da Vinci's Tiger, the reason I did that was I wanted that to start with the portrait and her looking out at you and speaking to you. Louisa June allowed me, speaking in first person with her, that was a really interesting narrative for me, because my editor asked me to write a slightly younger voice than I typically do. And she just instantly spoke to me in this very kind of poetic Tidewater voice that spoken great descriptive phrases about, water lilies. And I don't know, I would be able to pull it up, but her voice needed to be in first person, that I could really get you in her head, because she's reflective. And there's a lot of action in that book, but there's a loss of a brother that she adores in this U-boat attack, which again was rooted in an actual event. And actually, this would be a good thing for me to explain how I build a story if you want. Yeah. But she needs to, part of her journey is processing what's happened to her brother and her loss. And her mother has kind of pervasive low-grade depression, and she's dealing with that too. So I need her internal commentary for that narrative. It's not a really satisfactory, clear-cut answer. Sometimes I have to be honest. Sometimes it's instinct. Mm-hmm. Not always. Mostly I'm very research-driven. I'm very, I have very specific, almost like creating jigsaw puzzles of pieces that I've learned and been putting together characters. Sometimes, every once in a while, I can't tell you exactly why I did something. Sorry.
No, that makes sense. I want to circle back a little bit to whether it's your story to tell. Tammy was saying she'd very much like to tell the untold stories of Hurricane Katrina, but she's not a Black woman from New Orleans. And where do you feel that line is drawn of, writing across race?
That's a difficult question for right now. There is an appropriate and necessary correction that's being made right now in books and in publishing, where, for years and years and years, we white people wrote about other people's stories, or other people's stories weren't told. So I think it's problematic, particularly right now. And whoever just said representation matters, it does. So I would ward you off from that. Now, that doesn't stop you from writing about a different person, who might have been in that horrific hurricane. But I wouldn't take on another race for your persona. I think it's really important that we let people tell their own voice stories now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
yeah. So I got to ask you also another question. Just pause on the Q&A for a second. When you first became a New York Times bestseller, I'm sure that was beyond exciting, but was there this moment like, oh no, now I have to do that again? Like, was there a little bit of a fear of what's my follow-up book going to be?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll tell you all, the business is tough these days. You're only as good as your last book.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. I hope whatever response I gave was good. It is. Yeah. And I think too, I think I'm lucky again, having been a journalist first, is I don't take myself too seriously in terms of, I see myself very much as a crafts person and a reporter and story collector. I don't see myself as an artiste. And I think that has sometimes helped me with that kind of angst. Now, I have to be honest that the pressure to always do a little bit better is always there. And I just finished my 13th novel, and I'm about to start my 14th. And I've been incredibly lucky. Y'all. I really have. I've had an amazing editor who's been very, very good to me. And so I've been very lucky, and I never forget that. And I also know that my next book better be good because you are compared. You are. So, and I think partially, I haven't been good for all of y'all who have to start thinking about like marketing yourself and all, and like, positioning yourself. I haven't been particularly good at that. I have followed individual stories that have fascinated me. So I'm all over the place. Most historic in terms of time periods, most historic, don't do that because you have all this learning to do for each news story that you do. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 bookcases like this, you all, and they're all crammed full. And there's actually one in the next room that has all the Jeanne da Vinci stuff in it. So, if you stick it like Louisa June, I have to say, I don't want to say it was easier, but it was easier because I know a lot about World War II. And I know a lot about the home front in Tidewater, Virginia, because of the Across the Warsaw Sea. Actually, is this the second that I can tell you somebody way back asked, like, where do you get your ideas and how do you build a story from the facts? Okay. With Louisa June, I was lucky that my editor said, it was in the middle of COVID, World War II, write something fast about World War II. Okay. Do you want male or female? Female. Do you want home front? Do the home front. Okay. So I thought, you're always saving string, and always take reassurance in this. If you can't use it in this book, save it. Save string. You can use it in the next book. Across the Warsaw Sea was about the home front girlfriend and her family, and the fact that I had dropped in under a war-torn sky, the fact that there were these British evacuees, little children who made it across the ocean before the U-boats became too prevalent. But I came across all the tugboat information. I couldn't really use it in that, so I saved it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write about tugboat attacks. It's very little known, you all. If you can find little known facts, you're going to do better too. Find something that hasn't been written about before if you can. For instance, you all probably don't know that in 1942, immediately after Pearl Harbor, Hitler sent 5 U-boats to take out every cargo ship, tanker, and freighter that they could off of our East Coast. We were totally unprepared for it. They averaged taking down a ship a night for the first 6 months of 1942. Thousands upon thousands of merchant marine mariners died or went into the ocean and had to be, hopefully rescued. And I started reading. I managed to find, this is fairly esoteric, right? I talk about a website. I'm pulling out one of my files to show you. Okay. This is my show and tell.
There's no color on that folder.
No, there's not. Shoot, but there are other colors. Louisa June's all in pink. So I started thinking, all right, how am I going to research all these different U-boats? And I found, y'all, some pretty dry military histories about U-boats. But then I found this website, and God bless whoever this librarian or curator, whoever it was, it's called uboat.net. And they actually list every ship that was hit by a U-boat, telling the circumstances. And then if you click onto the next thing, it has what happened to the people on board.
Ooh.
Now, what I did is I read this thinking they went after a tugboat? Why did they go after a tugboat? Cruelty, trying to make a point. It was pushing 3 barges of coal. They took the barges out, and then they circled around and took out this U-boat. There was no reason for it. Yeah. Right off of Chincoteague Island, if you all know the Outer Banks of Virginia. Then I started reading and looking at names. Everybody there were 18 on, sorry, Panda was doing something on. There are 18 on the ship, on the tugboat, only 2 survived. And I started reading and realizing, oh my God, it's the same last name. There were 2 fathers and sons. There was one 17-year-old. Both the sons were 20 or 22. They both perished. One of the fathers lived. And I thought, what would that have been like for that father?
I can imagine.
And the story grew from there.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that I was just fishing. Where am I going to find my story? And you have to pay so close attention to everything. You can't get tired. Or if you're tired, get up, walk around, and come back.
Or have some coffee.
Or have coffee.
Now we know why you drink so much coffee.
Yes. Yeah, I made a joke about Right. So here's another, for instance, I made a joke about this at one of the presentations I was doing. Thank God I had my coffee. I would have missed those 4 paragraphs. For walls, here's another just example of how you all follow the breadcrumbs. And you guys, this is the fun part. I swear to God, the writing part is hard. I love this part. To learn about what life was like for the Army post guys, I did a lot of, and again, I will not promote Amazon in any way, except you can find really obscure things and get them through Amazon. You can. Oh, like with the Menominee here, the tugboat, the thing that really gave me, here's the other just heartbreaking. I want you guys to read Louisa Joan. But the other heartbreaking element that I found, besides that father and son, and thinking, oh my God, the father lived, what would that be like? He was the captain of the tugboat. And some of the families actually sued and I found the lawsuit, the 1940, whatever it was, a lawsuit. And one of the criticisms made was that the U-boat probably found that tugboat because the captain made a ship-to-shore call home to reassure his wife that everything was all right. Right? When you say, when whoever was asked, is there anything you can't write? And Peter will attest to this. There have been times that I've just read stuff like that and I had to put my head down and just cry for a second. And then I have the story of this. How would that family survive that? Right.
And you write to make people feel.
Yes.
You know? And so when you come across that piece of research that hits you aside the head and hits your heart, it's, it's hard to say, no, I'm not going to write about that.
No, but it's like you want to think with empathetic intelligence.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Compassionate intelligence.
Yep.
So I'm going to tell one other thing really quickly. So trying to learn about the walls life of Berlin at that time, I managed to find this handbook that was given to Berlin families when they came in the 60s. It was just a reprint of the thing. And I was reading it and there's all this information. Oh, it's great. There's all this information about, you can buy, German newspapers here. Go and see the Brandenburg Gate. It's wonderful.
Oh, wow.
And then though, talk about footnotes. There's this little footnote. By 1959, there had been 255 kidnappings and 340 attempted kidnappings in West Berlin of Army personnel.
Wow.
By KGB and the Stasi. And I read this and I went, what? And I couldn't find, what?
Just a little footnote in there. Welcome to Berlin.
Yes. So now I found, if you guys want to watch this, it's Gregory Peck in a role you've never seen Gregory Peck in before. I managed to find this film that was made in Berlin in the 50s, going in and out of East Berlin so that I could see it. All the rubble, all the propaganda posters. And it's called Night People. And it is about a young American soldier walking his German girlfriend home and being nabbed and pulled away to be held as ransom for some people that the East Germans and the Stasi wanted that were in the West. It's really wonderful. And then the last thing I'll tell you about this, though, is that, so I saw that little footnote. You have to read the footnotes when you're having your coffee. And I later, when I was interviewing people, I kept trying to find somebody. I couldn't find any other information. What do you mean there was, 255 kidnappings? Couldn't get anybody any information because, of course, I'm sure that wasn't really meant to be out there for anybody except the Army people. But I remembered, for instance, I had an aunt that I adored who was married, much older than my dad, 15 years older than my dad, was married to an Army doctor who had been in Berlin at the early, right after World War II. And she told me that she always carried a gun with her when I was young. And I thought, why? Mm-hmm. Now I know she carried a gun with her with 2 bullets, one for herself and one for her daughter. And I thought, it wasn't until I read this that sort of made sense. But when I talked to one of those military brats, I finally said, George Gilmore, God bless him. I said, hey, there's a statistic. Did you guys worry about things like that? I mean, did you know about that kind of? He kind of went, yeah. And I said, really? He said, yeah, I should send you my father's unpublished memoirs. He was a counterintelligence officer in Berlin at the time. And yeah, the KGB tried to recruit him 3 times. In fact, we had bodyguards. So the whole book, the whole main plot was from that footnote and then finding somebody to, following the trail.
Yeah. Yeah. That is wild. That's wild. Are you ever concerned about, Donald is asking, if you ever run into any legal issues with depicting certain people or historical events, and how does one avoid such situations, especially if you're interviewing living people?
Yeah, you have to be really careful about that, frankly. The way I've gotten around it now, again, most people I've been writing about are no longer alive. But with the Berlin people, I asked them to read the manuscript and to okay it, to tell me that what I was, using of theirs was okay by them. And I didn't make them sign anything, but I had the email exchange saying that yes, this is good. And actually, I'm so glad I did that, because George actually caught me on a couple of little slang boo-boos, and a couple of little military jargon things that I just kind of screwed up, because I'm not military, and he saved me from, not that you would have noticed it, but any military family would have, and thought I was a neophyte.
Yeah, it will pull them out of the story for sure. And, then you just have to hope that they're not a really slow reader.
Yeah, one of them was ill, and it took him a long time. So, but
but I'm sure he appreciated that. So, there's a question I really want to get to. What is it about your editor that made you say they have been good to you? And what makes a good editor in your experience?
That's a really good question. And there are multiple answers.
Besides the fact that Peter is your son, but your other.
Yeah, I would tell you that my best, I don't know if he's still there. I think he had to leave. My best, and you can tell him I said this, my best editor is Peter. He's my first reader. He always has been, he and his sister. They've always been my muses and my editors. Now, my professional editor, my publishing editor, Catherine Teagan, she's been incredibly good to me, because I have done, of all these novels, I think it's 8 of them have been with her. And she has, she also took a chance on me. I was an untested novelist. I was a journalist. I actually came into this by writing some picture books that were bedtime stories for my kids, actually, about conundrums that they had gotten into at school. And so just like, story is great. It's parable. It's like, we won't talk about, you really shouldn't be doing this, or, but let's think about this. And as those picture books came in, I was able to meet her, and I told her about that article that I had written, and that I had been getting all these letters from other World War II survivors. If there's time, I'll share one of those letters with you. I still tear up every time I tell it. And she took a chance on me to do that book. And she had to help me shift out of a more journalistic voice into a more novelistic voice. Although, if you read Under a War-Torn Sky, I hope you will, I think part of its strength is it's very episodic, because that's the way it was for these guys on the run, these pilots on the run. They had to move from place to place to place, and they never reconnected with those people, and they were being shoved like a hot potato. They wanted to get them down the line as fast as they could and not get caught. So she nurtured me through that. She then said to me, "What else do you have?" Which was such a gift. They don't do that as much anymore. They can't. The business has changed a lot. But she said, "What else have you got?" And I was, boy, don't ever go to a meeting with an editor without having at least 3 or 4 ideas. I kind of went, and I coughed up something really quickly. And I said, "I don't know. Do you think that's a story?" She said, "Yeah, I think so." She is, in terms of editing the manuscript, she is really wonderful at the larger picture. Honestly, I rely on, if you're looking for your reader editors, like with Peter, I'm always looking for characterization, pacing, authenticity, the power of the personifications that I'm trying to use. With my daughter, I'm always looking to her for thematic material and feminist content, and if I pull it through well enough. Mm-hmm. So I've already had those wonderful inputs from these 2 creative professional children I have, and they're so much better and smarter than I ever was, both of them. Peter in particular.
That's what we hope for all of our children.
Yes, exactly. And then with Catherine, what she'll do is that she reads through the entire manuscript, and she's always right, whether I like it or not. And she's really good at seeing whether characters have developed enough, and if every single moment within their journey tracks plausibly. And then what she does is she gives it back to me. She doesn't go in it, and this is something that I know from like having worked at a magazine for a long time. The worst editors, and I say this from my magazine days, the worst editors are those who really don't want to be editors. They really want to be writers, and they take a pencil or a pen and they just go right into your copy, and suddenly their voice is through all of yours, and it doesn't jive, it doesn't work, isn't right, but like they're writing it the way that they want and redoing things. That's the worst kind of editor. If you run into one like that, I would advise you to go to somebody else. A good editor is
I've had that happen, and it's terrible. And
yeah.
Then your piece is published and you're like,
what is that?
But that's not what I submitted.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't read well to the reader either. It has all this kind of conflicting voice going through. So the best editor is somebody who's going to give you notes after reading the entire thing, and maybe do some, specific, like, you don't need that paragraph, but then whatever he or she feels like needs to be corrected, they let you go do it and then look at it again. And only then might take, red pen and mark through some. Yeah. It's really good too. You want an editor too who knows she knows story. She recognizes story. And even just from a kernel of an idea, she can say, there's a story, maybe not there, maybe not that one.
Somebody asked if you ever get writer's block.
I have had days where, it is almost impossible to push myself. I feel like I'm trying to shove myself through a keyhole. But I think because of having been a journalist for so long, if you don't write your copy and turn it in, you don't get paid. So I don't have that traditional writer's block. I've had days where it's not working and I stop and I get up at 5 o'clock the next morning and go back to work.
We're going to wind down here, and I want to ask you a couple more questions. One is, what does it mean to you to be a writer?
I think it is the luckiest thing to be, because I'm always learning. I'm always learning something new. And I'm always imagining. And I've got characters talking to me all the time, and I feel it's the learning something new. I guess I'm just the perennial student. I love that constant kind of like I'm learning a new world.
And I think about, like, with historical fiction specifically, there's so much opportunity to learn.
Yes.
Because it's all you're researching. You spend so much time researching, and that part I agree with you is really fun. You can get caught up in that, and then knowing when to stop researching. So I guess I have another question. So how do you know when you say, like, okay, enough, Laura, stop it, like, get to the writing?
It's really hard, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the hardest things, because it's so enchanting. As you can see how excited I get talking about, and then I saw this and I went to that. It's when I start finding information that is repetitive. Then I know, okay, I got it.
Okay. That's a great bar there, because you do start seeing the same things over again. My final question to you. If you, and I've been asking this question for, I don't know, probably 12 years of the people I speak to, if you could go back in time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give her? And it doesn't have to be about writing. I got a few things to say to my 18-year-old self.
Yeah. I actually was a music major. I was planning on saving the world with classical music. And I had been writing all along as well. And I felt like such a failure that I got frightened by, there was a open chair with the the North Carolina Symphony, and I was a flute player. And then,
I was too.
There you go. There were 200 people signed up for that audition. I just thought, you know what? I write just as well as I play. I'm just going to, and I was already at that point in college, I was already starting to string for local papers. And if you read my novels, you will see that there's a lot about music in the novels, a lot. It comes in and I use it. So that would be my first thing. I guess my main thing would be just remember that everything you are experiencing, you will be able to use as a writer in some way or another. You're either going to grow in reflection, grow in knowledge, grow in empathy, or learn things that you'll be able to use later, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I would also probably say, I've been asking that a lot. Does that make sense? I usually talk about all these things. I have a master's in journalism. I would probably say to myself, you don't need that master's in journalism.
Save the money.
Yeah.
Laura, this was so wonderful. There is one little question that somebody asked that I didn't get to ask you yet. Do you want do you dream about your books being adapted to TV or film? I
do. And you know who I want to do that.
I can't imagine.
Honestly, I think he's gone now because I think he was going to connect with one of his friends on the West Coast. Honest to God, Peter's version of Under a War-Torn Sky is so much better than the book in some ways because he loved Madame Galois and he just hones in on her. So yes, I do.
Yeah.
I also really, really wish that Jeanne Veillette, the Da Vinci's Tiger, it's so Renaissance Florence, the pageants, it's just so cinematic, all the reading that I did. It was just so full of color and these large personalities. I would love for that one to be adapted sometime, just to watch it visually. It would be gorgeous.
Tell him to get on it.
So,
well, thank you so much, Laura. This has been such a treat. And everybody, you got to make sure to follow Laura on Instagram and Twitter. It's at L_M_Elliott, ELLIOTT.
Yes. And there's a website too, lmelliott.com, if you all are interested in finding out more of these things. And I have a lot of essays, y'all, answering probably far more succinctly and eloquently than what I did tonight. A lot of similar kinds of questions. So.
Tons of great resources on her site too. But thank you so much, Laura. This was such a treat. And I didn't even drink wine during it. I was actually being really good. I was drinking water.
And all your mugs.
We have great mugs. And this one says, "Fuel your creativity." This is our Symposium mug.
Artists persist.
Yeah.
I've got the Fuel Your Creativity. Wait, all your mugs, and my book's going to fall down as soon as I do it.
Do you have this podcast title?
Erica, all my colored pens, which I use for different outlining.
You made her day. Well, Laura, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us and hanging out for a couple of hours.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Symposium is brought to you by Pipeline Artists, a division of Pipeline Media Group. To learn more about upcoming live symposiums, visit symposium.pipelineartists.com and follow us on Twitter @PipelineArtists.